So please, a round of applause for young Jean Lee. So I'm going to start by asking you a question, and or one or two, and then we're going to open it up to y'all to ask any questions you may have for young Jean. The first question I have for you, I guess, other work that you've done up to this point, I'm thinking particularly of the two plays that we read recently in the class I'm teaching, The Shipment and Songs of the Dragons Flying to Heaven. Both of those plays have moments during which, quote unquote, white people, like white person one, white person two, take over the action and eventually become the center of the action. So your plays already have scenes in which it's like, this is the white people scene. Is this white people scene that we just witnessed continuous with that or different from that?
I think this is, this is pretty different from that, yeah.
Elaborate on that, how so?
Well, this was, this was specifically meant to be a straight white male identity politics play, which interested me just because, for such a long time.
Here they are. Round of applause.
Hey. So this is Frank Boyd, Patch Darragh, Scott Shepherd, and Richard Riehle. I was just saying that the idea of doing a straight white male identity politics play was interesting to me just because, for so many years, straight white men didn't really have to think of themselves as having an ethnic identity. They were just sort of the default human, and now things are changing to the point where they're finding themselves slapped with this label, like everyone, they don't like it because nobody likes to be labeled with their identity in that way.
So would you say at this moment, is that a way that straight white male privilege is actually no longer privilege as much? Like, is that a reversal of privilege, or? I
think it's like a little chipping away at it, I think it's slowly, clearly, like it's very slowly starting to erode, and as demographics change and there's and just the world becomes browner, I think there's a real threat to privilege of all kinds. It's evolved into, instead of being the worst play, like the worst nightmare, and it really was, because I've never written a naturalistic 3-act play before. I've never had to follow natural laws of theater. I've never had to worry about continuity or believability or identifying with the character, or even having the characters resemble human beings in any way, shape, or form. So these are just all of these restrictions that were sort of imposed on me. And it was really, I was totally out of my comfort zone. I sort of had to learn, I've been playwriting for a long time, but I had to start from the beginning, like an amateur, and it was really tough. And dealing with the subject, I'm an only child. I'm obviously not male, or so having to write about a family of brothers was really a sort of anthropological challenge. The way that I normally work with all my shows is I cast them first. I get an idea, the general. The idea of a straight white male identity politics show, and then I cast it, and then we just start having conversations, and then I'll go home and write something, and then bring it into rehearsal, and so that's sort of usually how my process works. With this one, it was a little bit different. I sort of opened up the conversation to a lot of different people who weren't just straight white men, and also I was just so unfamiliar with the way that straight white men talk to each other when women aren't around, because I've never personally experienced that because I'm always around, and
it was very realistic.
Right. So that was and so we actually had to introduce improv of language for the first time. Like usually I don't really work with that, and this time it just became necessary. They were just constantly improving for me so that I could get the language into my head, and a lot of it ended up in the script. And there was just, there were a lot of test audiences, and one of the things that was the hardest to figure out was just how to get the audience to not hate Matt so much that they just tuned out the entire play, which was actually like really, really difficult to do. People ask me, why is he such a cipher? Why doesn't he ever reveal himself? And the reason was because anytime we let him reveal anything, people would just jump on it and be like, aha, like that's why he sucks. And, he's just this type of person. So we had to be very careful about that.
Can I follow up that question? Just you mentioned this sort of experimentation with something that's so new and even alien to you, and the anthropological experience. Can you tell us just some of the more memorable like things you learned that you never knew about straight white men before, like secretly?
I mean, there was just so much. I mean, it was just all, I had no idea. I mean, obviously, like, I'm familiar with straight white men, but just as they relate to, women and groups and whatever, so mixed company. So, learning what it was like, it was pretty shocking to me. I mean, I remember I would have them improv almost every situation. I remember one was just, okay, just imagine you're walking down the street and you're meeting some guy who's coming the other way, and you're running into him on the street, and you did a play with him like 10 years ago, and you haven't really spoken since, and then it's just like, how do you greet him? How do you hug him? And how do you, and then there ended up being this whole sort of code, like you need to hug him or greet him in a certain way that shows you're not gay for him. It's not like a conscious thing. It's not like, oh boy, I can't let him think I'm gay, but it's just this constant thing of you don't want to hug too long, you don't want to hug when it's not appropriate, and all of these just sort of constant negotiations that are a guarding against sort of challenges to your masculinity or a feminizing of yourself. And obviously it doesn't hold for there was one of the actors in the cast who's just like, I never followed any of these rules. Like I didn't even know they exist until somebody, told me I need to stop hugging everybody. So, it's not like everybody, but it's much more prevalent than I would have thought.
Well, it was interesting for us too to try and sort of like analyze what's at the back of behavior, like certain behaviors, you know what I mean? And sort of like try, because you wouldn't let us off the hook. You'd be like, well, why do you do that? And we'd be like, well, I don't know. I mean, I guess, like, oh no, you can't show too much of your feelings because you've got to assure the other guy that you're okay. You know what I mean? Like it's like trying to dissect it and figure out what's at the back of these sort of unconscious social codes was actually pretty interesting. But I remember one that you couldn't believe and that became a scene in the show is that like men might sit in a cold room with their t-shirts on and not like go get a sweater. You couldn't admit that kind of weakness.
That's totally true, but I never thought of it as a thing until just now. Yeah, exactly. Like, totally. Wow. That's pretty... you mentioned the song choices. We were really enjoying the pre-show music, and I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about it, or how it's been received, or how it,
I came up with the idea of that pre-show music just because we were in New York. We did it at the Public Theater, which is, a much wealthier audience, older and wealthier audience than I'm used to. And I didn't want, like, if my audience, who tend to be sort of like more ethnically diverse, like more downtown, like if they came into that theater, I didn't want them to feel like they didn't belong there. So the music was really just to welcome them. And it had this completely unexpected result of just enraging the subscriber base of the theater. I mean, they were canceling their subscriptions. They were enraged because they saw it as an act of hostility and violence towards them. And it became this huge scandal. And and most of the people who came who were not of that group, they didn't even notice the music. So they were just like, what, because they're so used to being in these sort of like loud environments where music is playing. And so that became like a very interesting, I mean, that sort of said something interesting about privilege, which is coming into a theater and feeling like this space needs to be made for my comfort and having that level. Because I can't imagine walking into any performance space and just demanding that they change something that they're doing because it's making me uncomfortable. Well, my artistic mission is basically to always do the thing that makes me the most uncomfortable. And actually, my last show that I brought here was called Untitled Feminist Show, and it was about
Which was awesome.
gender identity, and that's also something that dealing with identity is very uncomfortable for me because I grew up in a mostly white community, and so when I was growing up, I was just sort of learned to constantly try to deny my ethnic heritage as much as possible. So I was just conditioned that way. So for me, dwelling on issues of any kind of identity makes me really uncomfortable, and I think it's really good for me to force myself into these positions where I'm exploring things that I don't want to explore.
Well, hearing you talk about the rules of guys sitting and not getting the sweater, when we were rehearsing, I kept grabbing the blanket and wrapping myself in it. So obviously I am...
You were told not to do that.
I was told not to do it. And I was like, oh, I guess I'm not as straight as I thought. I think it's a really... I was really surprised. I didn't see the play in New York, and for the three of us, this is just our second time ever performing it. So really learning a lot about how it's landing on people. I was really surprised at just how compassionate the play is. That and you talked a little bit about this, about the expectation that with the title, and that people are waiting for the big reveal about we're all drunks or something or whatever a stereotype would be in a play about straight white men in a family. So I just wish that I could be more like Jake, frankly. I feel it's been really good for me to play this part because I'm like, I should be more like that. But I feel like there's not a lot to defend because I think it's done with a lot of care and honesty and compassion.
Well, yeah, I'm so new to this project, but when I first read it, I felt there was a lot of empathy in the writing for all of the brothers, and as I get to know the writing more, I find myself identifying, and I think, this is like a Matt moment I'm having, and this is a very Jake moment, and that feels nice, and I'd love to have a chance to play all the brothers, at some point. But so no, it all feels very, very compassionate.
I think there's a great play between the title and the play. The title sets up a certain kind of expectation or something, or just sort of sits there as this frame inside of which it all sits, and part of what it does is what you were talking about, which is like put a label on people who don't think that label belongs on them, and then the whole play is kind of doing that because you haven't created these sort of stereotypical, David Mamet type characters. You've sort of tried to write these guys who are talking about it. They're trying to step outside of that label or not fulfill the destiny of that label. So to have the label on them the whole time as the title of the play is nice.
Well, there was definitely like a lot of experimentation with all of the characters and a lot of refining and like adding this quality and that quality, but the basic, their basic sort of almost allegorical roots were always sort of in place. Like I knew that I wanted Ed to be a character who grew up in a time and in a social class where this whole idea of being the best that you can be and selling yourself and, you know, pursuing what you want was just completely foreign. You know, it was just get married, have kids, get a job, you know, like just follow the course that is set for you. And, you know, I wanted him to sort of stand in contrast, you know, because that's, and I wanted him to sort of represent, you know, an era where skills mattered more than self-presentation or, you know, self-promotion. And I knew that, you know, Matt basically came about because a room full of women and queer people and minorities were complaining about straight white men. And I asked them, well, what do you want straight white men to be like? And so they, you know, gave me a bunch of stuff, and I wrote down a long list, and then I went home and I wrote the character of Matt. And, you know, I didn't tell them that I did that, and then I presented him as a character to them, and, you know, with the other characters, and they all just hated him. So, you know, so Matt represented these qualities that people said they wanted in a straight white man. And then, you know, and I wanted Jake, no, I guess they didn't start out, I mean, these did get really refined. Like, I'm presenting like the very refined version of what they were supposed to be. And then Jake ended up being the person who lives with cognitive dissonance, you know? Like, it's very rare. I mean, people have a really hard time with cognitive dissonance, right? So if I like think it's wrong to kill insects and an ant crawls here and then I kill it, you know, my brain can't handle the fact that I think it's wrong and I did it. And so usually what you do is you find a way to justify it. You know, like that was a evil red ant, it would have bitten me. You know, like, and Jake was a character who is unable to do that. He just sort of lives with the discrepancy between what he believes and what he does. And then Drew represented sort of, you know, the sort of self-help kind of therapy. I mean, he represented pretty much like everybody I know in terms of what his belief system is. And it was, you know, and everybody just kept identifying with him too much. And they go, oh, like, that guy's right. So we had to find a way. Like, in early versions, he would just say, like, therapy every 5 minutes until the audience would just roar with laughter every time he said the word therapy. And we had to, like, pare that down. But, you know, it was a challenge making him seem ridiculous also at times. I mean, the play was made to be an irritant. And to present a bunch of things that sort of bother you. And I mean, a lot of people told me, you know, of all backgrounds, they told me that I was upset by the play and I couldn't figure out why, you know, so I had to think about it for a while. And, you know, one of the things, I mean, different people were upset by all kinds of different things. Like one, I remember like a black queer guy saw the play and he said, you know, I was freaked out by how much I identified with the characters and how much I had in common with them, you know, because I have this idea that, you know, I have nothing to do with that. I mean, with those kind of people. And, you know, he ended up feeling like, oh, I actually grew up with more privilege than I thought. And so, you know, there's just been a wide range of responses.